Funding for this program is brought to you by Bismarck Big Boy. From pizza burgers flying style to fast and delicious fried chicken, Bismarck Big Boy has been a local legend since 1954.
The Wachter family had the largest impact of any family in my lifetime. And I knew T. Clem Casey, and I knew a lot of the other developers in Bismarck, a lot of them. They were successful because they had the resources and the time and the ability and the desire.
The Wachter family arrived in Bismarck in 1876 and started cutting ice from the Missouri River. The business soon grew and expanded into warehouse storage as well as coal and ice hauling. The Wachters also ventured into farming and ranching in the early 1920s, owning nearly 30,000 acres north of Mandan. In the 1950s, the family began to develop land in South Bismarck. Over the years, the Wachters have donated or sold at reduced cost land to build elementary and middle schools and multiple community parks and public facilities.
My great-great-grandfather, Gottlieb Charles Wachter, came to the United States when he was 16 years old. He came from Bernstein, Germany, which is located near Stuttgart, and originally settled in Philadelphia as a butcher. He was in Philadelphia for a very short period of time and then decided to come up to North Dakota.
They harvested ice off the river and put it in an ice house and delivered ice to the families in Bismarck before they had electric refrigerators, when they had ice boxes.
He would cut enough ice to be able to get through the summertime too, and basically was the city of Bismarck's main provider of ice. The family also was involved in delivering coal, and so we delivered coal to a lot of houses back in the day as well.
My grandfather was Paul A. Wachter, and his wife was Edna. And I believe he passed away when I was 9. And I did not know him very well because he worked hard, he socialized, and he traveled all the time. I was down at the warehouse on 5th and Front, and I was probably 7, 8 years old, and I was going through the cash drawer looking at the pennies. My grandfather saw it and came along and slammed the drawer on my fingers and said I had no business being in there looking at pennies for a penny collection.
I would say that probably the most visionary family member that we have would be my grandfather, Paul Henry Wachter.
Dad was a workaholic. He'd be in bed by 8, and he would get up at 5 a.m. I know that when I stayed with him, sometimes I'd go to work with him, and he'd get me up at 5:15, and that was early, and I was hard to get up. But his cure was he'd come in and throw a glass of water on my face. He'd pick me up after school during the week, and on Fridays when I stayed with him, he would go to the Patterson Hotel and order a big helping of shrimp and French fries and bring it home and for dinner.
My grandma Charlotte, I have nothing but the fondest memories of her, and she was just a fantastic woman, and I would spend almost every weekend with my grandma her house on Hannafin across from Tomaluri Golf Course. And in the wintertime, I would go sledding down the hill. And but I have nothing but just the greatest memories spending time with my Grandma Charlotte.
She was a very refined person. She graduated from Concordia. She had a music major, and she would play for the North Dakota pageants, I believe at Belle Maphis, and she would sing sometimes on the radio.
Well, back in our days, everybody would drag Maine. And of course, the place to end up would be the Big Boy parking lot. And I love sports cars. And I really did like the car that he had.
Was that the attraction?
Yeah, the car. And then, so we parked in the parking lot. I was with my two best friends. And he parked next to us. And I striked up a conversation. And I don't know, he came over and thought he could try to give me a kiss. And he found out that wasn't going to work. So I slapped him.
And what did he say?
I think he was in shock.
I was in shock.
Yeah.
So you ran away?
No, I didn't run away. I'm a salesperson. I wouldn't run away.
Actually bought the Big Boy about 5 years ago from Stan and Bonnie Rothenberger. And you know, so I went to the Big Boy. My earliest memory of going to the Big Boy was with my grandma, Charlotte, my dad's mom, Charlotte. And she would always take me there to get pizza burgers and have Hottentots. And so then growing up and, you know, dragging Maine, hanging out in Maine with all the other kids, I would go through the Big Boy. And one day I was going through the Big Boy and Stan Rothenberger was working at the window. And I turned to him and said, "Hey, if you ever decide to sell this place, make sure you give me a call." And he handed me my bag and says, "Get the hell out of here, kid." So, you know, interesting. He called me 5 years ago and said, "Hey, you know, do you remember that conversation we had when you were in high school and coming through and said, if I ever decided I wanted to sell the place someday, well, I want to sell it. I'm ready to retire. I've got 3 other people that want to buy it, but they want to totally change it. And I know that you've been coming to the Big Boy your whole life." You know, he knew that my parents had met in the parking lot. He knew how special the Big Boy was to me and to my family. And so he picked me to buy that. So it was definitely an acquisition that I wanted to do. And honestly, out of all the businesses that our family's involved in, the Big Boy is my favorite business.
So anyway, I went to BSC after college. I went a semester, I didn't like it, so I quit school. My dad said, "No problem." So he said I had to work, which I knew, and he threw me up on a scraper. And the job that I was on is the Wachters had gotten the contract for the Fish Creek Dam, and we had to do the dirt work. And I knew after that summer I wanted to go back to school because there was a better life than that.
We did a lot of earthwork. And so we had gotten word that there were going to be these dams that were built and that there would be a dam that would be built at Garrison. And so knowing that when that dam would be built, South Bismarck would not flood anymore. So my family acquired as much land as they could in South Bismarck, knowing that, you know, that at some point in time it would become very valuable. And then our family was actually one of the subcontractors that were involved in the Fort Peck Dam and the Garrison Dam during the construction of it as well.
I remember that we used to buy sand and gravel. First of all, we dug the lake. And Dakota Sand would sell ready mix. And I think during the time the Wachters owned it, that had poured probably close to 1.5 million yards. And we had a construction phase of it, and that was putting in basements. And I believe we came close to putting in 10,000 basements in Bismarck, Mandan.
One of the last floods in South Bismarck was in 1952 after the dam was built. And that kind of paved the way to be able to develop South Bismarck to have the Civic Center, to be able to build a shopping center and all the houses and everything that you see down there today. So after that happened, our family took more of an active interest in the real estate. That's kind of what jump-started the real estate development part of our business that we got into.
Paul initially started thinking that, here we are right next to Main Street. We should start developing some of this property. Matter of fact, when I started my business, I rented my office space from Paul Wachter. And that was in the southeast corner of 5th and Main, in a building that they owned that used to be the upstairs was offices and the downstairs was an auto dealership. And so when I started my business, as I said, they were my best client, and Paul was one of my best friends.
Well, my dad was a visionary, and I do know that before South Bismarck was developed, he had a model done of the lands in South Bismarck and how it would look. And he had the model built, and he put it up for display at the airport. And we pretty much have followed that model. And we kept certain parcels out for the Wachter family to go ahead and build on, like the office tower, Kirkwood Motor Inn, Expressway Inn. But we also knew that we had to, the community was good to us, and we wanted to be good to the community, so we would donate like land for elementary school, land for the Wachter Junior High, land for the Bismarck Police Station. That was donated. We set aside land after the Civic Center was built in South Bismarck, that they could use the land on the north side of the shopping center for additional parking.
It's probably not known, you wouldn't know it now, but Kirkwood Plaza the floor elevation at Kirkwood Plaza is 7 feet higher than the land was there prior, when it was a feedlot. They also owned Dakota Sand and Gravel, which was about 2 miles south, and the spoil piles from the gravel pit area and a lot of dirt from Cottonwood Lake, which was dredged. All of that fill was, they bought a Laterno scraper type thing, it's self-propelled, that you see on highway projects nowadays. The Wachter family bought that Laterno and hired a man to run it. And they ran it 24/7, year-round, hauling in dirt. They brought in thousands and thousands and thousands of yards of fill to raise that land where Kirkwood Plaza is. And so the floor elevation is 7 feet higher than what the land started out with. And the land around it also had to be raised, of course, for the parking lots.
Help tell the stories of Bismarck's past and become a financial sponsor of this program. Contact info@bismarckhistory.org to learn more.
My cousin's side of the family took care of more of the ranching and farming operations, and my side of the family, the Paul August Wachter side of the family, was more involved in the businesses. And the Eugene Wachter side of the family was more involved in farming and ranching.
I started riding out at the ranch when I was 10. Shortly after I turned 14, I was told not to go to the ranch anymore because the Wachter Real Estate Trust, the Bismarck was run by our side of the family, and the ranch was run by the other side of the family. And I believe at that time the ranch was around 28,000 acres and ran approximately 2,000 head of cattle. And a lot of quarter horses.
From what I can tell, we had 160 horses, and when we got into the cattle business, we had 4,000 head of cattle. And so that, a lot of the cattle was down where the Bismarck Civic Center is today.
I remember my dad deciding back in the mid-60s to build the Kirkwood shopping center. I do remember that Bismarck Tribune, which was run and owned by Glenn Sorley, came out and did a story about it and said that my dad's idea of building a shopping center was Wachter's folly. But I do know that we unloaded paper for the Bismarck Tribune and kept it in the warehouse and hauled it. But after that story came out, we didn't do it anymore.
The mall, it was a really big project. I think that it stressed my grandpa Paul H. Wachter a lot. Just think about it. I mean, you're building this huge shopping facility in an area that used to flood. You don't have any tenants lined up. I mean, I'm sure it was a pretty stressful project for somebody to do.
He hired a consultant to help him lease space in this shopping center that he was conceiving. And the three of us actually went down to Minneapolis to talk to potential tenants and convince them that this was going to be a thriving part of Bismarck. It's right in the center of Bismarck, if you will, at the time. And it's bound to succeed. You better get in on the ground floor. And so he was able to entice Woolworths and Pennies and Ward's and Herberger's. I believe that was the first anchors. And then the connecting hallways were filled with minor tenants.
Toughest part he had in building the shopping center is when the masons went on strike. Of course, that was over and above the contract. And if I remember correctly, it cost the Wachters an additional couple $100,000 to get the brick laid.
The name Kirkwood came from, that was part of the sales process of getting the Woolworth Company to be an anchor for the mall. The president of Woolworth at the time's name was Kirkwood. And so they named the mall after him to get him to commit to bringing a large store to Bismarck.
Unfortunately, my grandpa, Paul Wachter, passed away in his mid-50s, and passing away at such an early age, I think there was a lot of potential that we didn't get to see from him not being able to live longer.
I became a trustee in 1973 when my father passed away. I was one of 4 trustees. The trustees were split between 2 on the other side of the family and my brother and I on our side of the family. I believe the trust was created in 1952 and was set to expire 30 years after the death of the last grandson living on that date.
All of the different various companies that the Wachter family owned were actually owned by the trust, and then all the income would flow into the trust, and it would be distributed to the beneficiaries. Beneficiary is probably just a fancy term for shareholders. So shareholders, beneficiaries when it comes to a trust. And so instead of having a president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, they had trustees. And the way that the trust was set up is that there always had to be, well, first of all, there was a total of 4 trustees, but 2 trustees had to come from one side of the family and 2 trustees had to come from the other side of the family. So there was always that balance of power in the trust.
Working for the trust was interesting. They owned and controlled at least 18 companies. employed around 550 people directly and 1,200 indirectly. And they owned everything from liquor stores to warehousing to a trucking corporation, hardware store, a couple clothing stores, restaurant, a couple hotels, sand and gravel operation, ready mix operation, bank, yeah, Kirkwood Bank.
You know, one of the reasons why Kirkwood Bank was started was we did a lot of business with a lot of different companies. And so, you know, we thought, well, I mean, we can pick up their banking business as well. Plus, we had a lot of employees. So all of the employees that we had over 600 employees banked at the Bank of Kirkwood Plaza. Not to mention the fact that there were a few banks that were hesitant about financing projects in South Bismarck. So, you know, starting a bank in South Bismarck that would finance South Bismarck projects just was a natural.
Anyway, the trust split up, I think it was in 84 or 85.
You know, my family had gone through quite a few different transitions, probably starting in 1982 all the way up until probably about 1994. And, you know, our family was starting to split their different companies that they owned together and kind of going their separate ways. And so I worked for Dakota Sand and Gravel Company, and I kind of always wanted to go into the banking business. My heart was always set on the Kirkwood Bank, which my family started and owned. That was what I wanted to do. But my family sold out of that bank in 1992. And so I realized that I needed to find something else different to do. And my dad encouraged me to get involved in real estate development. So I transitioned into the real estate development side of the family business, you know, my senior year in high school. I learned about annuities, I learned about insurance, life insurance, learned about everything imaginable. So when I came out of high school, I had a pretty incredible competitive advantage over anybody. So naturally, going to college, I just wasn't really interested. I was interested in making money, and I was interested in carrying on the family name and working in the family business.
Well, what makes you stay here is your businesses. And Bismarck is a good place because we love the community. We wanted to be a part of the community. And I was always taught that if you're treated right, that to give back to it.
Their impact has been probably more than anyone in my lifetime. Has been the Wachter family had the largest impact of any family in my lifetime. And I knew T. Clem Casey, and I knew a lot of the other developers in Bismarck, a lot of them. We did work for almost all of them. And but the Wachter family, first of all, started out with more resources, more land, more big ideas. And so they were successful because they had the resources and the time and the ability and the desire. And so they've done extremely well.
Bismarck's my home. It's where my family is. And that's where I want to be. So that's important.
And because of me.
Well, of course, you.
Okay.
So when people hear the name Wachter and Bismarck, it's my hope that people will think about the long history that we have here in the community. And I hope that people really think that we've had the community's best interest at heart. And it's been an absolute pleasure to live in this community and raise children here, and I can't think of a better place to call home than Bismarck.
Help tell the stories of Bismarck's past and become a financial sponsor of this program. Contact info@bismarckhistory.org to learn more.
I asked Pa, I said, "What do you think, Riverwood, Pa? Do you think that'd be a good name?" So I submitted that name and I won it.
Remember when the Capitol burned? I looked out and there was this black stuff going by the window.
The president of Woolworth at the time's name was Kirkwood.
My parents decided, I think my mom decided, that Bismarck needed a zoo. So